Scotland's past is full of odd tales of second sight and ghostly apparitions. It has long been said that the spirits of the dead would return to seek the living, to impart secretive information, or to take revenge from beyond the grave. The superstitions and beliefs surrounding death and the return of the dead have always had a strong foothold in Scottish culture and history. Today, I will share some tales based on this ancient superstition. The first story comes from the Isle of Tyre, when on one day a young man was out walking along the seashore and stumbled upon a body which had been washed ashore. The corpse was completely bare from clothes, apart from an old pair of waterlogged sea boots. You see, in those days, finding a body of a washed-up sailor was not that uncommon, considering how dangerous being a Scottish fisherman was, and how quick the sea could turn against you. So it was considered the duty of anyone who found a body to turn it face down, which would grant the dead some dignity, and keep their identity hidden until the minister and the townsfolk had determined who they were, and when they would be buried. But on this specific occasion, the young man was so horrified by the body that he simply ran home and kept the body a secret. A few days later, someone else would stumble upon the body, and it was taken into town and given an appropriate burial. Some weeks after the funeral, when all thoughts about the body had left the young man, he was returning home one night, when out of the corner of his eye he saw the dead fisher. But now the man was standing upright, with a sinister gaze fixed entirely on the young man. He took a double take, but the haunting phantom was still there. In horror, the man ran over the hills on his way home, constantly checking over his shoulder, but each time he did, the fisherman was standing there, his eyes burning into the man's very soul as he ran. Soon the young man reached his home, and with all haste, jumped the gate and ran up the path. But when he arrived at the door, the pale fisherman stood blocking his way. The terrified man called to his wife, telling her the door was barred by a spirit, and she must do exactly as he tells her. She was to take a broom and soak it in urine, then dab the sodden broom on the doorposts. This would ward away the vengeful spirit. As the man's wife frantically ran about, executing the strange ritual, the ghostly fisherman just stared at the frightened fellow whose way he barred. Once the ritual was complete, the phantom's face began to contort in all manner of odd shapes before he leapt up high and stood atop the door. As he did, the young man dashed between his legs and threw himself into the house. That was the last time the pale visage of the dead fisher was ever seen, and the young man would never forget his cold, staring eyes. He would not make such a mistake again, and would from then on show the utmost respect to the dead. It is thought that the ghostly fisher had returned to the man as he felt personally disrespected, since his body was left to the whims of the sea before finally being recovered. A somewhat similar tale took place in another beach in the Scottish Isles, where two men were out one day for a walk. One of these men had to nip behind a large rock to relieve himself, leaving his friend standing on the beach. After some time the man returned, and his friend asked why he had taken so long. The man told him that he had spotted the naked body of a sailor floating some way off the coast, and was trying to think of how to recover it. Eventually the men and some other islanders got the body and lay it to rest in the traditional manner. But it was after this that the man who first saw the body was said to have received the second sight. He was plagued and ravaged by all manner of haunting spirits. Many doubted the truth of this until the man began to tell truths which had yet come to pass. So many of the now ragged and hag-ridden man's prophecies came to fruition that all on the island believed he had the second sight, and became a well-known seer of the Isles. Although many tell his life was a painful and sad one. You see, it was believed by the islanders that the incident on the beach did not occur in the manner the man suggested. It was thought that he discovered the body of a sailor and stole the clothes and possessions of the man before pushing the now unclosed corpse back into the water and returning to his friend. It was this horrible act that caused the man to be haunted by the vengeful spirits, and it was by this very thinning of the veil between our world and the world of the Sidhe that the man got his prophetic information. Not all meetings with the dead were negative or cruel, of course. Many were of unfinished business, or to right a wrong done in life. Again we turn to Tiree, where there once lived a seer of some note, named MacDonald. One morning, the seer was sitting in his home, when his brother entered the room and made for a small chest in the corner. Opening the chest, his brother took out some money, and told the seer that he was just on his way to pay a shoemaker, who had recently made for him a wonderful pair of new walking shoes. On the next day, MacDonald was devastated to hear that his brother had suddenly died and was soon to be buried. Not long after the funeral, the shoemaker came to MacDonald to claim the money for a pair of shoes. But the seer refused straight away. He saw his brother leave with the money and thought that the man had decided to exploit this situation in order to get paid twice. The old seer raged at the shoemaker and banished him from his house. But that night, MacDonald was woken by an odd cry. He quickly rose and crept down the stairs, where he heard movement. Peering through the banister, the old man saw the shade of his brother cross the room and begin searching behind a chair. The seer knew well not to interfere with the spirit and to allow the spectre to continue about its business. Eventually, the shade disappeared and the old man returned to bed. But first thing in the morning, MacDonald went to the chair and began to search. It was there he found a small pile of coins, exactly the amount his brother had owed the shoemaker. The brother must have misplaced the money or dropped it before venturing out. With all haste, a greatly embarrassed MacDonald ran to the shoemaker's shop and gave him the coins that were rightfully his. The old man, feeling such a fool, asked forgiveness from the shoemaker and begged that he accept his wholehearted apologies. In this instance, it would seem that the seer's brother knew of the injustice done upon the shoemaker and was determined to right the wrong and pay what was due. Mostly, the dead would make contact with the living first, but not always. In some circumstances, the departed could be summoned, but great care would be required, as the powers of the other world are far from tame. A tale from the Isle of Coll tells of a very unfortunate seer whom communed with the dead. On a bright afternoon, the seer of Coll was returning from the harbour to his house, which lay some 6 miles away, and was built near an ancient burial ground. As the man neared his home, he was met with a horrifically grim sight. His only child lay dead in the burial ground. The boy often went to the ground to play, but this time he had fallen asleep and been attacked by a wild beast. The seer broke down in tears and ran to the side of his son. He began to wail and scream. Then he took up his walking stick and began to viciously thrash the graves around him. The man screamed, "Where were you when this horror struck? Do you not care for me or mine? Many of you are my kindred and knew me well in life, yet you allowed this evil to befall an innocent boy. Answer me, those that have left this plain." An eerie silence fell over the man and his son. There would be no reply that afternoon. Much later in the evening, the tearful seer succumbed to an arduous sleep. It was that night that many voices would answer him. The hushed whispers of the shades of death told him they would take no blame, as they would have done all in their power had they been there to help. Unfortunately, for both the seer and his son, the spectres of the dead had been called away to the grave of Lachlan Moor to protect it from strange blood. Lachlan Moor was a great warrior and chief of the MacLeans of Dowart, who was killed by the Black Arrow of Douchy during the Battle of Trigunnyard. The seer himself and his family belonged to Clan MacLean of Coll, whose chief shared blood with the heroic Lachlan Moor. A summon to aid the clan chief could not be ignored, whispered the spirits. Upon waking, the seer quickly sent word to the Coll chief, who promptly dispatched a boat to Islay. It was found that on the day the child had died, someone had attempted to lift the gravestone of Lachlan Moor, and it now lay in its side. It would seem that the spirits arrived just in time to lay their weight upon the stone and stop any further movement. In this instance, the seer's ancestral spirits came to him to inform their kin of what had occurred and why they were unable to watch over his child. It is thought by many that the stone was moved by the enemies of the clan, and the essence of Lachlan Moor had summoned to him all the spirits of Clan MacLean. But the dead would not always talk at night, and in some circumstances could be called on for aid. This can be shown in our final short tale for today, which concerns a young woman from Perthshire. She had married a man some 10 years her senior. He was a hard worker and owned much farmland. But as the marriage continued, the husband began to treat his wife with much disdain and hatred. It did not take long for the poor woman's life to become an absolute misery. Day and night she was hounded and attacked by a cruel partner. She wished that her beloved brother had still been alive, as she knew he would come and save her from this nightmare. On one night, she begged her brother to return and help her, and soon after, the dark shade of a man appeared before her, and in a distressed tone asked her what was wrong and why he had been called. The woman, in shock, managed to locate just enough words to let her brother understand the situation. The shade then disappeared into the darkness. The woman could not sleep that night and wondered if she had really seen her brother, or if it was all just some trick of the mind. She would get her answer early the next morning. As the woman was hanging out her washing and watching her foul husband plough his fields, she once again saw the shade of her brother, but this time the spectre was out near her husband and began to approach him. As the shadowy figure placed its hand on the farmer's shoulder, he fell to the floor, stone dead, and before the woman had time to react, the shade was gone. It would seem that the woman's brother had come to save her after all. But what I truly find interesting is the brother's obvious distress in being called. It would seem that transversing between the worlds is a dangerous path, even for the dead. I hope these tales show you some examples of the superstitions and traditions surrounding the return of the dead in Scotland, and how it affected the lives of Scottish people. Thank you for listening, and as always, a special thank you to my patrons, who support my work and keep these tales alive. Until next time, Slán Java.